What you are about to experience is out of this world. Politics, history, and of course, a lot of entertainment. It's time to rock it with the Docket.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Kyle Dockery with the Dockery Docket. We are here with our very 118th episode of the Dockery Docket. I'm excited to be here, and I hope that you are excited to be here as well. And if you are excited to be here as well, make sure to go down below, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, so then you never miss one of my videos. So this week, a group of people from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists came out and announced that the new doomsday clock will be moved up from 100 seconds to midnight meaning that we're all going to die, to 90 seconds to midnight. The clock is claimed to be moved forward because of climate change and also the war in Russia, which is continuing to escalate, but we will talk about that later in this episode. Now, when this whole clock thing came out, I thought that it was absolutely stupid. It was the meme of the guy on TV going, "Oh no!" Anyway, it's a stupid clock. There's no way that these different scientists can predict the end of the world, right? Right? Of course not, but there have been some strange coincidences. As since the clock was changed to 90 seconds to midnight, the world has been on fire. Now, I'm not superstitious or anything, but this week has been nothing but an absolute mess. It has been full of chaos. There have been mass shootings, the war in Ukraine is starting to heat up again and could lead to a world war, and as I am talking right now, there are major protests on America's streets right now. The narratives are changing, the violence is raging, and it looks like we are going into a second summer of love, and it's only February. Now, the fire and the violence started in Atlanta, as the police in Atlanta wanted to build a brand new training facility in the Weelaunee Forest. Now, I'm probably saying that wrong, you can correct me later. Now, Antifa and others were not very happy about this, as they claimed that the city of Atlanta was creating a quote-unquote cop city. But you'll remember in the past, Antifa wanted the police to have more training, so this training facility would train more police officers so then they could be better trained, but don't expect Antifa to have any logic at all. So these Antifa protesters decided to create an autonomous zone in the forest of Atlanta. Now, these protests got extremely violent, and so they had to send in more police to stop the violence. So it looks like this city is turning into Cop City without the training facility in there. Weird. Anyway, the police decided that they were going to do a clearing operation to end this protest. Then things started to get heated, as Georgia Department of Public Safety Colonel Chris Wright got into a gun battle with one of these protesters. According to Officer Wright, the protester fired at him first, which hit the officer, critically injuring him. The officer was able to respond with shots of his own and was able to kill the protester. The officer was then sent to the hospital where he was placed in ICU, where he is expected to recover. This shooting turned things from bad to worse, as this just made Antifa more angry, as one of their comrades was just shot and killed. So on January 20th, Antifa called for a night of rage. As they wrote on their Twitter page, consider this a call for reciprocal violence to be done to the police and their allies. On Friday, January 20th, wherever you are invited to partake in a night of rage in order to honor the memory of our fallen comrade. And so the night of violence began, as there was a video of these Antifa members throwing scooters into the road. I mean, at least they weren't looting them, I guess. Then, of course, there were the typical fires. A police car was lit on fire and businesses were destroyed. People started boarding up their businesses to make sure that the fires didn't get to their buildings. The mayor of Atlanta, Andre Dickens, came out and said that he would not tolerate violence or destruction of property. Now, I have played and shown several videos and photos of this violence to you. So then you can clearly understand that there is violence. You can see the fires and you can see the Antifa members have weapons and they are shooting at cops. We can all see that, right? People could seriously get hurt or lose their income because their business is destroyed. However, according to some people in the mainstream media, the only violence that we are seeing isn't coming from the protesters, it is actually coming from the police officer that shot the Antifa member that shot at the police officer first. The police are clearly trying to defend the city, and this idiot is saying that property damage isn't actually violence. Just take a listen to this.
That, you keep using these words, violent, and it gives the impression, the only violence or the only acts of violence against people that I saw were actually police tackling protesters.
I'm sorry, but destroying businesses and people's property is violence because there's a possibility, once again, that people could get injured. As the mayor of Georgia recently came out and claimed that there were different rioters that had explosives, which I believe were fireworks, and people could get seriously injured from that. So the governor of Georgia had to do something to calm this situation down. And so the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, did that as he declared a 15-day state of emergency, claiming Georgians respect peaceful protests but do not tolerate acts of violence against persons or property. This state of emergency sent 1,000 National Guard troops to the state because the state of Georgia knew that things were only going to get worse. As before this emergency act was signed, there was a video that was released showing 5 police officers beating up an unarmed black man named Tyre Nichols. Now, to go over the Tyre Nichols story, we have to go back to January 7th. Now, I will say before we dive any deeper that the facts are changing. More information is coming out every single day. So this is my best guess of what happened. I believe there was a routine traffic stop, and I am of the assumption that they got the wrong guy, but that still doesn't excuse what these officers did. As according to my sources, multiple cops pulled this man out of his car and began to beat, pepper spray, and even tase him. Then apparently, Tyre Nichols escaped the police officers and started running away. The police then chased him. When they caught up to him, the second altercation was worse than the first. As looking at the video, it almost looks like each officer is taking turns beating up on this one man. They kicked him, clubbed him, and left the poor man limp and unconscious. He was then taken to the hospital where he succumbed to his injuries on January 10th. Seriously, my heart breaks for the family of Tyre Nichols because this was probably one of the most violent and probably the worst police and civilian interactions that I've ever seen in my entire life. Honestly, this video probably goes up there with the George Floyd video. And that's why I'm not showing it to you guys right now, but you can go online and find it yourself. Luckily, justice was served, as the 5 officers that were involved in this beating were fired and are now facing many charges, including second-degree murder. And as you might have guessed, it led to many protests across America, which makes sense. It was a terrible video. As cities like New York City, Memphis, where this situation happened, of course, had protests. Portland, Los Angeles, and Seattle were all hotspots for both peaceful and violent protests. The ones that got violent were the ones that were led by Antifa. As in New York, Antifa posted this, claiming that people should bring rocks, heavy objects, pipes, spray paint, kerosene, and lighters. Then, on the other side of this post, it tells people to carry a knife. Listen, I watched the video too. I think that the situation that happened is absolutely terrible. But this doesn't mean that more people have to die, whether they are police officers or if they are protesters. Because just like in any other situation that happens with stuff like this, there are people that are just there peacefully protesting. You're allowed to do that. But once things get out of hand, then people have to step in and stop them. And there are some people that just want to start mischief and destroy things just because they can. Now, when it comes to these different situations, I believe that I have been consistent. I have called out police officers for acting stupid, like with George Floyd, and I have called out different criminals that have acted stupid as well, like people trying to grab cops' guns or something like that. Each situation is different, and I believe that you have to look at the facts and not just look at the skin color of the individuals involved. Because to be honest with you, I didn't want to mention race in this episode because it's not needed. We should be able to point at the police in the Tyre Nichols situation and say, wow, they were clearly in the wrong. It doesn't matter if they're black or white, what they did was terrible and wrong and they should face justice just like anyone else. However, the media is making a big deal about it, so I have to talk about it as well. Now, for this situation, the narrative has changed, as the police officers and the victim in this situation were all black men. There wasn't a white man in sight. So for this situation, the media and the protesters shouldn't be claiming that the situation was due to white supremacy. But still, there are people with signs saying to stop the war on Black America, and also the mainstream media coming out and saying that this killing was white supremacy or race isn't that big of a deal, even though with other situations, race was a big deal. Which, once again, I will say it shouldn't be a big deal, but I have lived through many of these different situations to know that if all 5 of these cops were white and they beat up a black man, things would be a whole lot worse. People would have claimed that it was the second Rodney King moment, and we must focus on American racism in policing. Now, all that has changed, as according to The Independent, focusing on the race of the officers involved is a dangerous distraction. And guess what? I totally agree with that. If an officer does something wrong, they should be called out whether they are black or white. I think I already mentioned that. However, it has been the media for years that have been creating this black versus white narrative. It goes all the way back to Trayvon Martin, who was shot and killed by George Zimmerman. The media rushed out and claimed that George Zimmerman was a white man, but he was actually a Mexican American. This, of course, is not me defending George Zimmerman, don't want you to think that, but this is me pointing out that the media has created this narrative, and now that the narrative is changing, it is wrong to point out the skin color of these individuals. This happened with other shootings as well. Some people jump right away to the police's side and say, hey, they didn't do anything wrong, or they jump to the person that got shot or killed side and claim, hey, they didn't do anything wrong. People do this without looking at the facts first. They don't watch the video and just make assumptions. Then we probably have one of the stupidest articles of the year, and it's only January, as Van Jones, who is popular on CNN, claimed that this police beating was due to white supremacy, as he claimed that these cops were driven by racism and that black people are not immune to the effects of anti-blackness. Now, it is interesting that Van Jones would say that these cops were motivated by racism because once again the media has spread this lie that black people can't be racist at all. Remember, reverse racism doesn't exist? And if reverse racism doesn't exist, then does that mean that racism against your own race exists? It's all confusing because the media has created this narrative. Like, there was a whole big controversy on what racism is. It used to be the person hated another person because of their skin color. But now if you Google the definition of racism, it says prejudice, discrimination by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular race or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. In this Tyre Nichols situation, which group was the marginalized one? Which one was the minority? Why is it that we can't just look at this clip and say, wow, the police did something wrong in this situation? Maybe they need more training. Maybe they need to go to jail where they belong. Or in another situation, we could say that criminal reached for the officer's gun. That's really stupid. Instead, we get the media creating this narrative of black versus white, and all it does is divide people. This wasn't the only situation where race was mentioned by the media, as there were many mass shootings that happened in California. Instead of the shooter being the typical white lone wolf, it was an older man that was Asian. Once again, I have lived through many of these situations as well, and know that if the person that did this mass shooting were white, there would be articles everywhere talking about how America needs to talk about toxic masculinity, or we have a problem with white men with guns. However, for this situation, we get articles like this one claiming we need to stop talking about the race of the California shooting suspects. Well, that never stopped the media in the past, But now the media is focusing on the guns and claiming that we need more gun control. This person passed all the background checks and passed all the red flag laws. And California has one of the strictest gun laws in the entire country. We should be able to look at the evidence and say, wow, that person did a terrible thing. I don't care if he's black, white, Asian, whatever. He should be locked up and thrown in jail. Now, I hope I made myself clear on both of those stories. I'm not trying to be a white knight because I'm not at all. All that I'm trying to do is point out when the narrative flips, the media ignores race. But when the narrative is right, they focus heavily on race, and it creates a divide in the country. And honestly, I think that could lead to the destruction of our country, as it could lead to a civil war. That is if we could survive World War III. Now, Joe Biden was very clear in the past that the United States wouldn't do anything stupid like send rockets or tanks to Ukraine, because that would escalate everything and lead to World War III. Here's him saying that in March of 2022.
Strength, and we'll never falter. But look, the idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III.
I mean, you know that Joe Biden is serious because he got close to the microphone. So this is why I was shocked when Joe Biden basically claimed that we are going into World War III, as he announced that we are going to send tanks over to Ukraine. Here is Joe Biden saying that.
Today, I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, the equivalent of 1 Ukrainian battalion. Secretary Austin has recommended this step because it will enhance the Ukraine's capacity to defend its territory and achieve its strategic objectives.
That's right, the United States of America is sending over 31 M1 Abrams tanks to help protect Ukraine. Now, I have said this in the past. I want Ukraine to win this war. I like Ukraine and want them to be successful. But how long are we, the United States, going to ignore the fact that we are clearly in this war with Russia? We have sent billions of dollars over to Ukraine. We have sent missiles over to Ukraine, and now we are sending tanks. American boots might not be on the ground over there, but the American influence definitely is in Ukraine. To me, this whole Ukraine situation is nothing different than a Korean War or Vietnam War. The American government supports their team that they want with the money and resources, hoping that their side can beat back the communists. Now, America isn't the only country doing this, as Germany is also sending tanks in as well. And I mean, Germany already has admitted that they are at war with Russia. Here's a video clip of the Prime Minister saying that.
Yes, we have to do more to defend Ukraine. Yes, we have to do more also on tanks. But the most important and the crucial part is that we do it together and that we do not do the blame game in Europe, because we are fighting a war against Russia and not against each other. Thank you.
So when are these other countries going to step up and say, okay, we are at war with Russia? Because clearly we are if we're sending weapons and money over to Ukraine. Now, my thought is I think that this war is going to escalate a lot more until it gets better. I think that Putin will see that the world is against him, and then he could try and wipe out the entire world with a nuclear bomb. In the end, hopefully next week will be a lot more peaceful, and hopefully things won't escalate. And for all of the situations that we talked about this week, we need to think about the people that we lost or could lose if the riots, the gun violence, and global tensions start to increase. It could be devastating and lead to many disasters. And if it does, you know I will be here to talk about it. And with that, I just want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Dockery Docket. And until next time, like my mom always says, be good, be kind, be loving, goodbye.